This is episode 34 of the Progression Health podcast with online coach Paul Dermody. We're going to discuss how to age well, among many other topics. So, Paul, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, man. I feel like I didn't say this to you off the air. I feel like the implicit implication, if you like, is that I'm actually aging well, which is a lot of a lot of pressure to put on me at the start. Thanks, man. Long story short, online personal trainer, work in very much the same field as yourself. Kind of passionate about the more lifestyle side of fitness, genuine. I don't consider fitness to be hitting arbitrary calories and macros, although that can be incorporated into periods of fitness lifestyle, if you like. I work with clients in various places, mostly online, with a smattering of one-to-one clients, depending on where I live at a given time, and deeply passionate about what I do. So my ultimate philosophy is trying to help people reconnect with the joy in food, irrespective of the goal. What would you say? I don't have my colors nailed to a flag. I'm not pro or anti-diet. I don't think anybody should do anything specifically. It's whatever the goal of the client, I try and help them achieve that goal if I can help them in that specific endeavor, and do so whilst hopefully evolving their perspective and actually enjoying the journey. So that's just a little bit about me in a nutshell.
Yeah, very good. I love the flexibility and how you're not stuck to any one approach. So what's the kind of the typical client that you have? What do you help them most with? Like you're talking about to enjoy food. So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
I kind of say that the typical client that I have is trying to quote unquote escape a diet cycle, which is basically the false dichotomy mindset of being only on or only off the diet. If anyone's listening, Ross, and has never heard of what a false dichotomy is, it's basic when you've been presented with something that is falsely only option A or only option Z with no middle ground. And you'll probably have seen examples of this. Maybe you've experienced it yourself. I know I have, where you are just on your plan or you're just off that plan. And that's much more of a perspective. So the thing I find the most interesting when I'm working with clients, especially in this mindset, is how do we get to a place where, irrespective of the decision made, there is no transgression being committed. That is paradoxically very fearful for a lot of people. They think, well, if he gives me unconditional permission to do what I want, then I'm going to do everything negative. And I actually consider that to be the complete opposite. It's knowing you can do or eat anything you want gives you unconditional permission to do it. It doesn't mean you always will, but knowing that you can is the biggest difference, because then you remove that sense of threat that there's an impending catastrophe about to happen. Because that's what I've noticed. I work with, say, one specific lady who comes to mind. We have a very good client-coach relationship, I have to say. But I remember talking to her recently, and when we were speaking about things, we agreed that every time she woke up, almost every single day, she would be back on a diet, back on a very rigid set of calories that I did not allocate to her. And in her mind, the catastrophe already happened. She was just waiting for something in her day-to-day life to set that catastrophe off. So it could be something like forgetting her structured lunch, or it could be overtime at work, or it could even just be, honestly, it could be a change in the weather, by her own admission, that is. And she'd be back off the diet and she'd be ready to start again tomorrow. So we had to kind of get her to a place where the pattern itself, the actual, as I call it, the F-it mentality, I don't know about swearing on this podcast, but the I've blown it now, I've destroyed it now mentality, that's always going to happen. So we needed to get her to a place where she actually may have perceived herself to have blown the diet and then responded in a very different way. As in responded in such a way that is, actually, there's no bandwagon to get back on in the first place. If I stop getting back on a bandwagon, I will never fall off a bandwagon. I could actually talk about this all day and still only scratch the surface, by the way. So that's the client that excites me the most to work with. I have different kinds of clients. I've actually referred out a few recently who have just been interested in, say, going from 15% down to 8% body fat. I think I'm far too removed from that side of the industry to work with those clients now, and they'll be shortchanged if they come to me. But I get excited when I think of the behavioral element out of food and nutrition and the joy and basically personal values based coaching to kind of sum it up. So I don't know if you see that yourself when you're working with people. I know you're a bit more one-on-one than me, so I don't know if the nutrition aspect comes into it, but you might see patterns like this yourself emerging when you're working with people.
Yeah, for sure. Just the big one I hear is just that, I was bad, or the food I ate was bad. And it's that black and white mentality, like you're talking about A to Z. And it's just like, that's not how food is, it's all in the dose, really. So, yeah, for sure. I see that a lot too. Makes me think of, so we first met back in Galway City Gym. But back then you were a bodybuilder in a former life. So how has your views changed from back then to now?
The Progression Health podcast has teamed up with TRX. So TRX is a bodyweight training piece of equipment that you can hook up anywhere, anytime, and I highly recommend it. I use it in every session with my clients. I use it to warm up and also for stretching. But if you are traveling, which is where I recommend everyone use it, it's hard to get to a gym. It's hard to find the time. But you could literally work out from your hotel room with the TRX and the door attachment that it has, where it doesn't damage the door, but it gives you an effective workout. I also like to add in other things like glute bands and resistance bands. But once you have the TRX, then you can figure all that out. So get yourself 50% off on the TRX home workout equipment with the code Progression Health TRX and boost your workout effectiveness and consistency. Progression Health podcast is brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is an online therapy service which will help you to more effectively manage your mental health. Mental health is very important, and it's something that all of us are realizing now, especially after the pandemic. During the pandemic, for me especially, it was very challenging, and I reached out to BetterHelp. I tried out a few of their licensed therapists, settled on one for the majority of the pandemic, and I found the help that I received invaluable. And the great thing also is that you can speak to your therapist outside of sessions. If it's not working out, you can switch. Very affordable. It's really easy to use also. And if someone hasn't tried therapy before, but you're kind of, you're curious, I would highly recommend BetterHelp. So what we've done is we've got a sign up link I'll attach in the show notes, and basically you can get a discount to get started and start improving your mental health today. So BetterHelp for better mental health.
And just as you said at the start, aging well. I definitely think you're aging well from everything I know about you, and I see you doing, and you're still always getting your workouts in. So, how has your view of fitness changed from when you were a bodybuilder to as you're aging well now?
So I would have probably done anything back at 7 years ago to have the muscles and the physique, because I did think that was very much a missing component of happiness. I learned quite quickly that it wasn't. And I'm fortunate because I consider that to be one of my moments in life where I realized nothing is going to compensate externally for anything missing internally. And it wasn't even this crazy massive void, but it looked cool. I thought it looked amazing, and I wanted to achieve it and attain it myself. And then I kind of climbed that mountain I began climbing the mountain, which sounds a bit silly because you're just competing with training really, to realize that it certainly wasn't for me. It certainly wasn't the mountain I wanted to climb up. My philosophy has definitely changed in that I was driven from a place of insecurity for sure when I was doing that. I wasn't running to an endeavor. I was definitely running, not even from myself, but it certainly wasn't a consciously created value. Competing in bodybuilding was not a reflection of my values. So if you see me training on Instagram and you see me maybe get a little bit closer to a Nordic curl or a one arm pull up, that is very much a reflection of my current value, whereas that wasn't. And I just didn't know it. I have since seen firsthand the dreadful influence that a lot of the mediatized culture has on us, where they're constantly reassuring us we can be successful, we can be gorgeous, we can be sexy, we can be everything we want to be. And that continues to torture us because most of us can't actually be that. We're also exposed to this idea where we can almost diet or train or do something, insert thing here out of our insecurities. But I actually consider those insecurities and those anxieties a reminder we're alive. I consider them very much part of the human condition. So I'm no longer as uncomfortable with my insecurities and my anxieties, and that I do genuinely train. I'd love to say it's nothing to do with body image. I would love to say that. That's not true. There's still an element there. I find that very hard to shake off, but I think it's a healthy amount of body image. Like if you consider it like a bit of a pie chart divided into the important sections of my life, I consider genuinely being mobile and relatively fit and relatively strong and relatively in shape looking by my own standards to be part of the components of that circle. So it's only been 7 years. I'm 32 years of age now, but my whole philosophy is completely different. It's funny that I say this to clients all the time. When I was talking to you a moment ago about not having a transgression as a perception when you're eating any food, when you quit yo-yo dieting, it's not actually dissimilar, in my opinion, to the journey I've had where I quit kind of bodybuilding and went into a much more calmer, quiet, minimalist lifestyle, if you like, where my decisions aren't actually that different. I still eat a high protein diet. I still do my resistance training. I'm obviously much more flexible in mindset now. The perception is night and day. I feel like I've lifted so much off me by being able to do whatever I wanted to. And then I've almost gone and returned back to some of the similar decisions. I still eat my veggies. I still eat my fruit. I do love a beer nowadays that I wouldn't have allowed myself to do before. But it's like a 10% change in actual physical lifestyle in the sense of I still try and eat well and move, but it's a 100% perspective shift. I have no interest in sacrificing my life. The extreme endeavors require obviously extreme protocols. And what I'm after now in life is a much more well-rounded lifestyle. So, I mean, that is going back 7 or 8 years. And I'd say we were both influenced a lot by our environment. You know, it's quite a bodybuilding gym that we were in. So we found ourselves, I'm sure I don't want to speak for you, but I'd say like myself, you found yourself kind of influenced by the atmosphere and the environment that you put yourself in.
Yeah, absolutely. We were fully immersed in it. And it just makes me think of two kind of points. Is I hear a lot of people saying, you know, oh, I'd love to have abs or a six pack, or I'd love to be a bit leaner. And it's kind of like, you know, obviously you've been as lean as anyone. So could you just talk a little bit about what the actual experience of that is like? And then also just, it sounds like you've done a lot of work like on your values and internal work in those 7 years. So like, I guess just kind of what changed, you know, for that 100% mindset shift.
Definitely consider myself someone interested in that introspection, if you like, that kind of questioning method of why am I doing what I'm doing? Where am I getting this attachment from? Like I said earlier, the bodybuilding not being a reflection of my values. Because I see, and I've been lucky enough, whether you consider this as a good thing or a bad thing, I've seen friends continuously be like, oh, that was the wrong mountain for me to climb, and then start racing up an equally distracting, numbing out mountain, you know, replacing bodybuilding with business, with whatever you want to call it, and constantly making the same mistake of trying to fill an external void with an internal void with external things. So I've seen that a lot. So I've really kind of shifted that philosophy. The process of getting lean, it depends. I consider it, I guess it's all perspective again. It is very difficult. You're very hungry all the time. It's not, I wouldn't argue it's fun. It's definitely not fun, but I also think your perspective comes into it. I would consider myself someone who practices gratitude almost by nature, if I'm entirely honest. That's not something I've ever actually had to struggle with. So even when I was competing, say, or even in the last couple of years, if I've done quote unquote dieting phases, I'm very blessed that I have the option to restrict and exercise restraint with foods. I was in the Philippines in 2019 and I got a DM from somebody. This was Christmas, the day before Christmas Eve. And I got a DM from somebody and I was walking down the street. Philippines is a very poor area. I saw people begging, literally looking for food to last till tomorrow. There's a very vivid memory I have. Someone DM'd me and said, how am I going to survive all this food at Christmas? And it was a really interesting kind of shift in perspective between looking in front of me in the Philippines thinking, wow, like in survival to these people is, will I get a meal tomorrow? Survival to this person is, how am I going to survive the abundance of food? And I was kind of wondering, how are we defining survival? What's the perspective? And that's actually been one of the biggest things travel has offered me. Going to, you know, very underdeveloped or developing countries will develop you in ways that you can't yet imagine if you haven't been lucky enough to do it. But I don't know why. I've never had the experience of, oh, I have to diet, or, oh, poor me. None of that. I find it very much that I'm blessed I get to do it. I can't believe I have the option to exercise restraint. There are countries in the world where people don't even have clean water. It's not fun. You're hungry a lot the leaner you get. And I find myself, once I go under about that 12% body fat mark, my body, I'm just simplifying. My body's almost like dying to return back to 15%. Even a few weeks ago, I managed to drop a bit of body fat. I'd say for the first time in a while, I went down to single digits, I would think, maybe close to it. And as soon as I got to that 9% mark, my body's just like, no, get home now, and stews and bagels and stuff. And I came back to Spain 2 weeks later with a little bit noticeable weight on me. And I didn't even notice I was doing it. But as soon as I get beyond a certain point, my pleasure threshold for food just increases so much. So I don't consider dieting in any way to be wrong or right. I don't think the six pack, I want a six pack, I don't think that's as rewarding as most people think it is. What I do believe is a lot of people don't consider what they genuinely have to forego in order to get it. You know, what are you sacrificing by walking this path? And that's a question for anything in life. But and on a probably slightly cheesy and deeper level, I think fitness and getting lean, if lean is your definition of fitness, which it isn't mine, it starts as a kind of a get me sexy endeavor, and then it leaves us asking questions of a much deeper meaning eventually, sooner or later, where we kind of think, is this really worth it? You know, having your abs, you know, I'm not going to say it's not a nice thing to have. Of course it is. It's a really nice thing to have. And then all of a sudden you find yourself having to forego other decisions that would lead to maybe the accumulation of calories and obviously body fat. So there's no wrong or right answer. It is definitely what you value at any given moment in time. But all I know is I've been valuing different things at different times in my life. When I was bodybuilding, it had to be lean. That was number one value, no doubt about it. When last few times I've done any kind of quote unquote dieting phase, it's because I've been in a great place psychologically. I did one earlier this year. I lost about 14, 15 pounds of body weight. I was thrilled to do it. I was happy. I was psychologically ready. I did it over a 5-6 month period, which means my rate was pathetically low, but I was happy to do it that way. And then I've traveled and I've been around certain parts of Asia where I've been sampling very high fat foods and very calorie dense foods and really enjoyed that. And my body fat hasn't been my highest value. So I'm not interested in kind of prescribing anybody advice on what to do with their diet or with their body. I think that's poor education and leadership if somebody hasn't directly asked you. That's obviously a caveat. I want people to do their own thing. You don't want to listen to me. I don't care what anyone else does. I would rather people knew how something works and then had a robust enough understanding of self to at least introspect along the way that you're going to encounter hurdles and roadblocks, and it's definitely going to be difficult. Are you just going to give up when it gets tricky and then demoralize your self-esteem? Or are you going to show up the way you said you'd show up and actually do the goal you said and lay it out for yourself? But I suspect on some level that fat loss thing just isn't quite as meaningful as most people assume it'll be beyond a certain point. And that's why people find it so hard to stick to. There's other factors, definitely. But it's not fun. It might be worthwhile, it might be meaningful, but in the same way you study for an exam, which definitely isn't fun because you want what's on the other side. I kind of consider that a little bit like dieting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't really realize the sacrifice we have to make to get lean. Absolutely, yeah. So you touched on it a little bit, but like I guess with your favorite clients, like who's like your ideal client to work with and the client you find the most rewarding to work with?
I think when somebody tells me that our work has increased their sense of autonomy, I like when people can come back and say, I'm making this decision on this basis for this reason, because I get it now a little bit. I kind of think in many ways for many people, certainly that I work with, my demographic, it's about unlearning a lot of the absolutes. I had a lady start with me yesterday who was told in her journey to lose what you might consider to be a life-changing body weight that she cannot eat strawberries, must be blueberries. And I can't even imagine. That is literally to me the equivalent of asking, Ross, should I spend 2 1 pennies or 1 2-penny coin when I go to the shop? It is that irrelevant. So when you can take people out of these hard and fast rules, these rigid mindsets, because we know, Ross, ultimately, irrespective of the goal, rigid practices, rigid diets are linked to worse outcomes across a physical, emotional, and psychological spectrum. Meaning, your rigid diet, and I'm talking about the perception of rigidity because, mine and your 2,000 calorie diet could be perceived very different. I might be thrilled about it and it might fill you with dread. That's perception. That's the rigidity is based on how we perceive it and the rules that come with it. But imagine if I said to you, you're going to do this thing that you've been told all your life is going to make you happy. It's going to make you in shape. And by the end of it, by the years, decades, you're going to carry more body fat. You're going to be more self-conscious about food and you're going to be emotionally in a worse space. You would never sign up for that shit. But a lot of people are unfortunately led down that primrose path. And when I get people who want to kind of converse and back and forth and share ideas, because my philosophy, and this is just my opinion, a lot of kind of the once a week kind of check-ins of I hit these calories, to me, it's just a sterile relationship. I don't bond, I don't form any connection with people over it. I've no real interest in that. I'm happy to have it part of a protocol, but I want to work away from that personally. So I like the interaction. I like the discussion. I want to what happens on a scale is fine. You have at it. If you lose 100 pounds, 20 pounds, go nuts. I'm much more interested in mindset wins. You might make a decision today that literally influences the rest of your life always, or you could just adhere blindly to a calorie number that I gave you and then report back to me and, get your pat in the head for the week. So for me, it's a no-brainer. But again, that's just me. I think there's what I spotted when I started coaching people, and I've had to evolve my philosophy over the years. I'm far from perfect. Even in the language I use, I used to be a big one for humor and almost sarcasm and lightheartedness, and I've had to evolve that over the years because that can come across very much like an asshole when you mistime humor, even though you might have great intentions. And I consider myself to be someone with good intentions. It's being diligent, being very aware of the client's needs, and hopefully shaping their perspective so that they feel confident that maybe they will go down a period of aggressive dieting or intense calorie tracking for 8, 10, 12 weeks, and they'll finally do it because they love themselves or they want to see how far they can take it rather than that's the only way to drop body fat or love themselves or lose weight or anything like that. So people are going to be very different people at various stages in life. The Life with Paul or Life with Ross chapter in our clients' lives is a tiny fraction compared to the Life Without. So to me, and I don't always get this right, and I haven't always got it right, but I do my best to make sure that the footprint we make is one that's certainly heading in the right direction at the very least.
Yeah, absolutely. No, as long as I've known you, you've always had great intentions and given great advice. So don't worry about that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Do you know yourself when you look back on something you used to believe, or maybe you might look back at a piece of content and you cringe a little bit thinking, oh, I could have said that or done that a bit better or nicer. I like when I first became a trainer, I was so, I was like, went in with my philosophy, and I remember I was like, right, no big words. I'm going to be that trainer who doesn't use big words, because I know how, I always thought that looked really stupid. It just looks like it's really insecure. Like, I get 42-year-old Sheila. I'm like, Sheila, you're about to do the leg extension. The quadriceps have 4 muscles, one of which crosses over both the hip and the knee joint at the same time. The triceps have 3 heads. I was like, I'll never make that mistake. But then I put them on a hack squat and I battered them until I couldn't walk. And I was like, that's just as bad. They text the next day, I'm aching. And I'm thinking, I should have like gently eased them in 2-3 reps from failure so that they get a feel and a taste for it. But instead, I just became another trainer that smashed them in a different kind of way. And I obviously learned as time went on, but that was probably the thing I look back on now the most. And I hope and I pray that the 1 or 2 clients I pushed too hard, hope they continued on after me.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's the lesson there that, you go too hard and you know how far you can go type of thing as well. So it's not like a completely, fruitless effort. So yeah, definitely.
Good point. I didn't look at it from that way, to be fair. So hopefully that was the lesson nice and early for them, that they're like, I can go places.
Absolutely, yeah. And people are notorious for underestimating how far they can actually go, I think, is what it comes up with reps and stuff like that. So we've done them a good favor there.
We all do it, man. Even I film some of my own sets and I'm thinking, oh, that was difficult. And then I watch back and my facial expression is still normal and, no change in pace. And you're thinking, I really wimped out there. There was 3 more reps there. I'm full of shit. So yeah, we're all tempted to wimp out of a set too early.
Yeah, absolutely. Like perception and reality, like they can be completely distortive. So I guess that's where a good coach comes in and they give you some objective feedback. So one of your posts that I really liked was the title, food will always be there. One thing most dieters don't consider. I love that reminder. Is that something that you kind of always use with clients? Is it like an older idea? Have you updated it? What are your thoughts on that?
I stole it from my own girlfriend, who she said it to me years back, and I've since, I was probably, so long story short, I was coming out of a lot of binge behaviors in my teens, and the bodybuilding demands exacerbated it again. It's certainly not bodybuilding's fault, not at all. Some people do bodybuilding can come out unscathed, but it did exacerbate those patterns back in me, and I kind of went typical that I would be, the typical person I would be, from one extreme to the other and all that stuff. But ultimately, Orla just was saying, whenever I would be planning on going back onto something aggressive, when we first met, when I first met my girlfriend, I was thinking about doing a second bodybuilding show. So I was obviously plotting my second very hard diet for it. But I just remember Orla innocuously said it one day, like, food will always be there. And it really struck. It landed. It was like a punch in the face. It was one of those moments that just made you stop and go, oh, well, like, just because I'm going to quote unquote diet on Monday, it won't make food any less tempting. It won't make it any less tasty. Fortunately for us, it's always going to be there. Imagine if it wasn't. She didn't say any of this. She literally just said the line innocuously, but then my mind just started going into overdrive with the ambiguity of the statement and the various contexts to which it could be meant. And it has definitely become a cornerstone of the philosophy of coaching. I try and pass that on to clients where they'll say, look, I'm ready for fat loss phase now. And ultimately the conversation will conclude, even if we don't say it directly, that no matter what the intentions are for Monday, there's only so much of a deficit you can create. If you go dieting, don't think that just because you get miserable on celery sticks, don't think you're going to be any more prone to a bigger deficit in any real world way than you would be if you eat your habitual diet, but just smaller amounts of it. And you'll see a lot in the industry, I'm sure you've seen it, Ross, where there's this very much a strong anti-diet kind of versus diet culture movement. And I think both of those movements go too far, personally. I think it's not helpful. I think, for example, if you step away from intentional weight loss and into let's say an intuitive eating phase, which is something I actually take the principles of that and do with some of my clients who don't wish to lose body weight, I think that's incredible. And I actually think you can eventually take some of the principles of intuitive eating and keep them as your mindset as you maybe step into a healthy diet phase in the future, or you may never want to diet again. Either way, that self-awareness is something we should all be coaching in people. Like, do what you want to do, know the trade-offs, know that there's risks to intentional dieting. The actual maintenance rate is quite poor. And if we were on more honest as fitness professionals, we'd be real and say, look, you might lose 10 to 20% of your body weight, but you're not probably going to have a crazy transformation for life. So say the data anyway. Now, I also believe, just to piggyback off that, that if your own perspective and mindset is one of just different elk and different gravy, I think you can completely transcend any kind of data and just go and do your own thing. I do believe that too. So, but that's neither here nor there, and that's just a personal opinion. That's not anything I can actually back up. But yeah, food, like when I'm talking with my clients, I'm trying to remind them, look, it doesn't matter. Fat loss itself is going to be very unspectacular. It's going to be dull, unspectacular, boring, droll old Tuesday is going to be needed to be adhered to just as much as anything. And people get really busy in life, and they'll maybe put off a fat loss goal because they're so busy, which I'm fully endorse, no problem. I don't think everyone should lose body fat, but they might start to put off other things like training and other things like movement and activity and sleep, which I cannot endorse, because I think that if you imagine fitness to be like a switchboard, and okay, fair enough, you're taking down, say, one aspect of it, you can still have all the aspects like sleep, movement, stress management, all the other good stuff that literally are in place, so that if you ever want to change body composition, you just have to adjust one factor, which is nutrition. But unfortunately, a lot of people are very much in a chaotic mindset where they sleep's all over the place. They scroll social media for hours, no routine, no rhythm, straight to a crash diet, and then straight back to the old behaviors. So they're philosophically and behaviorally the same person. They've just gone from complete chaos to strictness back to chaos. That is the absolute opposite of, say, food will always be there. So the reason I'm so adamant, and we touched on aging well at the start of this podcast, the reason I would be adamant on thinking about this from a much more long-term perspective is when you have all those factors in place, when you have all the kind of the factors in place, it's going to be a lot easier to tolerate boring days off. I know I'm on a bit of a tangent here, but I said when people are really busy, they find it hard to diet. Boring Saturday or nothing to do, a day off is going to present the same kind of challenge in a different kind of way, just kind of like boredom eating. So there's no day that this is challenge free. There's no day that this is just easy. There's no day that you get a smooth run. And behind all this spiel, ultimately, literally lies the philosophy that food itself will always be there. It doesn't matter. So get rid of this idea that the food aspect is going to become any easier than it is now. If anything, adopt a really healthy amount of pessimism that maybe I won't be as adherent as I want. And there will be roadblocks along the way, and there will be stumbles. And if I can just practice getting good at the consistency in spite of having the odd wobble or two, then I'll be good. So yeah, man, again, I talked at the start about how I could talk about this all day. I feel like I could talk about it all day and yet still conclude nothing sometimes.
Yeah, just give a lot of opinion and thought, a lot of food for thought. I feel as though you're really making a point of thinking long term, as opposed to, let's say, for example, I want to get abs, and in the next 6 months I'll get it, and not thinking past that. Would you say that's kind of like a fundamental point of your coaching, that you get people to think, or even, how you manage your own health, think, long-term sustainability, and even just making better decisions as well, long-term?
Absolutely. Because I know I've actually talked about almost dieting in the context of like fat loss and whatnot a lot in this conversation with you. And it's funny because it actually does come up surprisingly low amount of times with clients. Like, we don't actually talk about foods and specific calories and macros that much. I completely agree with you. I don't know how you can live if you don't have a solid sleep routine. The difference is indescribable. When you get your sleep in order, even if people I know are notoriously poor sleepers, but you can't say you're a poor sleeper if you're scrolling social media late into the night. If you've no kind of set or similar waking time and bedtime, but particularly waking time, those things will change your life. Because if you think about what sleep actually does, beside the fact that there's less time awake to nibble on food, because let's be real, nobody's getting Ben and Jerry's out of the fridge at 6 a.m. It's always in the evening when we're up too late. When you think about that, when you think about, making decisions in a tired and fatigued state, and even when you think about the effects on our hunger and fullness hormones, that our hunger hormone is literally higher when we're tired. You think about the actual effect that a good night's sleep has on those things, you immediately put in place the foundation for really good things to happen. So you're probably going to get more neat activity and more movement. You're probably going to be a lot more calm. And then obviously routine is just such a vital component for us. And plus less time on social media. People who are up late are definitely either watching like too much Netflix or on too much social media. And I'm not judging that stuff. I'm really not. Do your thing. I hate this righteousness that a lot of entrepreneurs have of no TV, no days off. Just no TV that eats into your bed schedule, because it's so important. So when you get all those right, all of those things right, it is fascinating how much of a chore nutrition seems to not be, in my opinion. If you really think about nutrition, is It's more trying to eat in a very structured manner. So if you eat breakfast, lunch, dinner, and supper, and you sleep well, I hand on heart believe that mindset alone is going to take away a lot of people's heartache. Because I talked about how rigid dieting was linked to worse outcomes and how people go from chaos to binging to chaos. Structure and routine are two remedies to that. And if you think about the importance of sleep and the effects it's going to have on overall energy levels, and then the importance of structure and routine, I know that, let's say you're a client of mine and I say, Ross, look, I don't care what you do for the next week. I just want you to report back having eaten at around breakfast, around lunch, around dinner, and around supper. Then you can be in an all-inclusive hotel buffet and just get whatever you want. Just get whatever you want, make a smart decision. I don't mind what you do. And it just counts as just replace that one meal. That was your breakfast. Might have been higher calorie, not the end of the world. And at least you're implementing this sense of structure and calmness and routine. Even when I travel myself, I still keep the mindset of breakfast, lunch, dinner, supper. That's just mine. It could be anything for you. So that's very much one of the more important parts of lifestyle, because I do think at some point you're going to have to disassociate kind of healthy living and how do I say this? Because it's not that you have to disassociate them completely, fat mass and healthy living, but dieting, ironically, you want it to become the last order of priorities in a sense. Like any kind of calorie tracking or food quantification should almost be the last piece of the puzzle on a well-established set of behaviors. And I think they include quite simple stuff: sleep, decent hydration, and a decent movement. And if you feel, for the most part, new parents don't count, parents in general, that you're too busy to sleep well, then I don't know how any trainer could help personally. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe I'm just being too close-minded. Maybe there's some freaks in the world, but they're probably not coming to me for coaching. But yeah, there's a couple of pillar foundations that I think worked with someone. This will be a good indication. I worked with someone, multimillionaire, super wealthy, super fascinating person. And they told me they had climbed to the top of every ladder in their life. And now they've realized that it wasn't the right ladder and they have to buy back their health. And that's why they're working with me. And a very sobering moment, because if I told you millions of euros in the bank, and this is absolutely true story, millions of euros in the bank, and you'd be sadder than when you start, you would never believe me. And yet I have like first-hand proof from someone who's telling me, I wish I could go back to some point in history where I would at least do a few push-ups a few times a morning, go for one walk, but it's like blinkers on, 20 years, climb the ladder. Like, this person's retired, about similar age to me. They'll never have to worry about money again a day in their life. And yet they're on a remarkable journey to change their health, and they're finding it particularly difficult. So the interesting kind of thing you see when people neglect their health in pursuit of another thing, failing to see that without health, there is no other gold. And you mightn't feel the consequences when you're in your 20s and maybe not in your early 30s, but they'll come for you. And if I've learned one thing, they'll sneak up fast. I even have a lady I work with, and I talked about mistiming humor. This is where I think I got humor well, or got it right. She told me that she was like, I don't get it. I was, it's like one day my metabolism just slowed down. And I'm joking, did your metabolism slow down, or did the accumulation of not doing anything just finally catch up with you? And, it's like, oh, yeah, that does make a little bit more sense.
Yeah, it's all habits is what you're referring to, which is like, yeah, it's not, we don't focus on the goal of the body fat. We focus on the habits, and then the body fat falls into place. So just in terms of like health habits, as you age, like, what is it about like certain systems, routines, that kind of schedule and stuff that, like, in your opinion, helps you to stay healthier? Why is it important to have those 3 meals? Like, what does it allow you to do? Or, what are the health benefits from that?
So if we're talking about, say, long-term health, a relatively seamless control of body fat mass is what we're looking for. And if you think about your hunger, if I locked you in a room for 3 weeks, you'd survive without food. Maybe not water, but you'd survive without food. Yet if I asked you to go from breakfast to lunch, you might report, oh, I'm so hungry, I'm so starving. We program our hunger cues psychologically. So if you think about somebody who may be living with obesity, or somebody who's living completely in a crash diet mentality, if you've ever noticed, they might report to you saying, I have no knowledge of when I'm hungry or full. I don't actually have that knowledge. I don't have that biofeedback the way you or I have it. Whereas if you start to eat over a period of time, breakfast, lunch, dinner, supper, again, in mindset, it could be anything you want it to be, you'll notice that your hunger arises at around breakfast time every morning. It's that, whether it's psychological patterning, call it whatever you want. And then it goes down, you eat your meal, and then it comes back again around lunch. And you're not thinking about food in the meantime, assuming your meals are satisfying and satiating enough. So it's the subliminal programming, if you like, or the psychological programming of your mind to get hungry at very similar times daily, plus just the habit. Like, for me, I wake up in the morning and I know that I have my glass of water, wait an hour, then I have my breakfast. And it's almost autopilot now at this stage. Similar with training exercises, I think a lot of people complicate this. I could talk about this for a full podcast in and of itself, but I found, I don't know if you agree, a lot of people hate exercise because they think you have to destroy yourself to get the benefit of exercise. Whereas all you need to do is get good as a pull, push, and some lower body movements. And when I program for people, they're like, not hard enough. And I'm trying to gently tell them, you say it's not hard enough, yet you haven't stuck to a training program in 20 years. Try the bloody thing. So there's that aspect too. So the importance of routine just comes in reducing the amount of friction between you and what you want. Like, there is no spectacular moment. There is no suffering for a goal if you're looking at aging well. There is just a series of small behaviors that you do and embody well. And I don't think it's ever too late to become the person you want to be. I remember someone messaging me before, I'm 50, is it too late? I really don't think it's too late I can't ever promise you an outcome. But if you start embodying small behaviors of routine, structure, movement, quiet reflection time, I think these are some of the most important pillars of health as we grow old. And the other thing, that this is a complete personal bias, and I don't know if it'll fit into you, I have found like less is so much more. I've done so much downsizing in the last year. I have so few things in context of what I used to have. I still have a few too many clothes, but I'm going to get rid of a lot of them when we move again. Don't even have a gym membership anymore. I just have a backpack and a pair of gymnastic rings, which I'm not very good at. Hey, you have a home gym in your bag. And this, live in a small apartment on purpose. I have very little things. And I almost feel like I've escaped this kind of game in society in a sense, or at least I'm trying to do my best to escape a game of who can die with the most, who has the biggest car, who has the nicest house, who has this, who has that. And the life that I'm living is one that I'm consciously trying to choose the least regrets or the fewest regrets possible. So there's that aspect too. But, some people aren't necessarily in a position to do that because of kids and commitments and mortgages and maybe stuff that they made prior. I'm just fortunate. I don't find myself in those positions right now.
Yeah, that's your system, is to kind of be, for want of a better word, like minimalist, which, you've decided with a lot of forethought, which sounds like really, really desirable. It's just simple, less decisions, less friction, like you mentioned. So, yeah.
Friction. It's friction, Ross. It's complete friction. If you talk about a healthy lifestyle, I don't know. Do you know what I really do like in the health and fitness movement now is I think it gets really misunderstood. I'm not saying this. I think body positivity and health at every size is a good thing overall. I think it kind of goes a bit too far. But I like the fact that we're not equating, say, things like body size to health and fitness and whatnot. And I like the fact that we're genuinely being very, again, it's become a bit of a dirty word, but diverse in things like. And I think that comes from encouraging people who maybe do live in a bigger body to start removing friction relative to where they are and start trying to make it a bit easier. Because what I've noticed is people who live with obesity or people who live in an overweight body, that they don't want to do so anymore, they really overestimate the difficulty that they need to live by. Now, there will be difficulty in certain pattern breakings, like let's say you have a big appetite, or let's say you pass your favorite takeout in the evening and skipping that and going home and cooking a meal. That's the difficulty. But the difficulty shouldn't be in starving yourself to death and then like trying to do that for the rest of your life. So it is friction. And it's not easy. And sometimes for a lot of clients, it might take a therapeutic setting. It might take work with a great therapist, or it might take work with a trainer who just understands you, who's certainly not filling a therapist role, but who's certainly provoking the best in you. But yeah, when you say that friction, I know you're only echoing back what I said, but just trying to make it as smooth and seamless as possible, which isn't always easy.
Yeah, it's in those little decisions, and just kind of, for some people, the little decision could be just to pass the takeaway instead of to stop in. That could be their habit that they formed, So everyone has their own little individual challenges. So
we all do, don't we?
Absolutely, for sure. It's kind of, I think, awareness as well is like a big point that underlies everything you're saying, to realize what are your individual challenges, Do you think the challenges that we face in terms of managing our health, aging well, do you think they're individual, or do you think you see a kind of a trend among your clients, yourself, your friends, people you know?
I think the perception will probably always be individual. I think no two people respond to stress the exact same way. Obviously, there's certain universal things, especially in this day and age, work, maybe loneliness, maybe socio-economic factors that maybe stop people from actually having the money and being able to afford to do certain things. I think it's both. I think there's certain shared struggles that a lot of people are going to face. We're in a recession now. I'm sure a lot of people are struggling to make ends meet, and that's very difficult. And then I think the individual perception of stress is so interesting, for better want of words. But all I need to do is just watch how, say, I live, like I said, one bedroom apartment with my girlfriend, and how she responds in certain situations and then how I respond in certain situations, and maybe her strengths and weaknesses and my strengths and weaknesses. And even just all I need to see is that, to just see how two different people can perceive the world and perceive certain things in a completely different way. So we're not very, I think as a whole, I don't think humans are amazing at communication. I think a lot of the remedy to this is to become a lot less judgmental and a lot more open and honest. Like, I don't believe in sugarcoating things for the sake of it, but I also think tough love can just be justification for being an asshole. So, yeah, I think if we get better at communication and make it a little bit, however we do it, I don't know, make it a little bit more inviting, maybe a little bit more quote unquote safe for people to just open up and say, look, I'm really struggling here. I'm really having difficulty with this part of my life. Help. And even if we don't have the emotional capacity to help, then, I mean, when I was 15, one of my friends asked me for coffee, maybe not coffee because I don't think I drank coffee at 15, but we certainly went somewhere to a cafe. And he told me he was struggling with his sexuality. And this is back in 2005. So there wouldn't have been the movements you see now. And told me he was struggling with his sexuality. Told me he didn't know if he was gay, straight, bi, he didn't know what he was. I remember he told me after, he's like, I knew I could come to you. You're such a good listener. But the truth is, I just didn't have the emotional capacity to respond. I didn't know what to say. So luckily, I said nothing. Luckily, in doing that, I said nothing stupid. But I actually didn't have the emotional maturity that I would have liked, other than to just sit there and listen and hopefully not make them feel judged. Ironically, a little bit older, I realized that sitting there silent is one of the best things you can do for people. If you don't know what to say and if your input isn't necessarily going to help people, sometimes just being there to support people can be a huge thing for people. I've seen it. I've seen clients get safer with me where they're more confident to tell me, actually, the truth about not going to the gym is I have more flab on my chest and I feel lads laugh at me. I'm like, well, okay, I didn't know that. And now we can, if you want to work out and if building muscle is something that's really important to you, we can work chest muscles at home. We can do push-ups. There's ways and means. And all of a sudden you get people looking at maybe through the eyes of insecurity, but at a slightly more solution-oriented guise, as opposed to becoming the insecurity for the rest of their life. I know it's a bit of a tangent and a complete waffle, but I felt it was important to share as well.
Yeah, no, just that aspect of listening and being a good coach. It's like, the saying is like, it's not a problem shared, it's a problem have and a problem well responded to. It's a problem shared. That's all it is, really. So being able to communicate as you get older, kind of like you mentioned, like unlearning effective habits. Like, you might have better habits than me in certain areas. I might have better habits than you. And if we can share with each other, we can learn from each other. Whereas if all you're doing is telling me what I'm doing wrong, we're never going to get anywhere. I'm not going to learn anything from you. So
totally, that's a great point. That even that skill in itself, you never want to lie to someone, but if someone's doing their best, and this is a really good skill for human beings, well done on trying a thing. Like, well done, rather than someone could send you a chest press and like it could look garbage, the bar could be wobbling, and like you might see someone who's got really poor control, like, oh, you need to get lower on your bench. I see. And I mean this, I see somebody who maybe stepped out of their comfort zone and did their first rep. They are now ahead of the person not doing the rep. So I totally agree with you. I think that's a great point.
Absolutely. And just kind of going back to the point of like people being in bigger bodies and diversity and stuff like that. It's like, we need to encourage people more, like encourage everyone to be more active, to do that little bit of activity, whatever their challenge is in terms of being active and exercising more. I think just as coaches, like adapting more and encouraging people more and being less judgmental, especially like on the gym floor, where I think people can be especially judgmental.
It can be cruel. I agree with you, because people have heard all this information before, so it's not an absence of information. And I obviously don't have the answers. I do have a long-term client. She's been with me 3 years. She told me that she went to a gym years back and she hopped on a treadmill just to get a feel for the place. And one of the trainers came over to her and said, no, you shouldn't be doing cardio if you want to lose fat. You should be in the weight room. She hadn't mentioned that she wanted to lose fat. So obviously, that put that in her mind, which was really not a nice thing. And we're working together, and she said the reason she's been with me such a long time is because I never assumed that she wanted to lose body fat. But, I learn from my clients, man. I'm learning just as much from them as they might be learning from me. They teach me a lot, particularly from eyes and from viewpoints that I couldn't necessarily have related to, or struggles that I've never had. I'm lucky. I consider myself naturally an empathetic person. Since I've been a young child, I've always been able to feel people's emotions. You vibe well off people. You can feel certain energies of people. And it's a skill, fortunately, that lends itself to coaching. Like I said, man, I don't always get it right. I'm listening to here. I'm sorry, I'm speaking with you here, and I'm not speaking to someone with all the solutions. This is me doing my best. Yeah, man, not assuming anybody who's going to move wants to lose body fat is another good thing. Like you said, if we're going to encourage people to get moving, then maybe the carrot that's at the end of the stick or whatever it is, or at the end of the string, shouldn't just be fat loss. Maybe we should be encouraging deeper motivations.
Yeah, maybe it's something as simple as like your mood, even, just to put yourself in a better mood. And if fat loss comes about, great. But that's something.
Well, what are you going to do on periods of your life like that? I've been there. I'm sure you've been there, where you're like, I'm not prioritizing fat loss for the next few months. I don't care. You're just not going to move. We need to have deeper. And if we're the fitness industry and we're trainers, and if we're setting the standard, and the blueprint is, I'm not dieting right. So throwback to my cardio throwback picture, throwback. Like, we're setting the standard. What message is that actually sending to people, that the only incentive for actual exercise is just fat loss? I actually think that's a really, really bad value to send to people. I think it's having the opposite of the desired effect. So I think if you can exercise irrespective of what you're doing with your nutrition, you're going to get immense benefits anyway. I think we need to drive that home more.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I would be prone to little bouts of anxiety, and running for me has become like my medication almost. It's like I tell myself to run to feel less anxious, because I know then the rest of the day, or even the rest of the week, even knowing that my system is running, and that's my system for managing my anxiety. It's like, sure, maybe it helps me to lose a bit of body fat, or maybe even just maintain my weight, but that's just kind of like an extra benefit that I found through exercise, and I guess through being less rigid as well, actually, kind of like you mentioned, get away from being rigid. So exercise can be so much more than fat loss, for sure.
Yeah, 100%. It's so interesting, isn't it? I think if you talk to any trainer who really loves what they do, I think we've all really gotten into it because we all got so messed up with rigid mindsets, and now we've seen it from a different perspective, and we just want other people to be like, no, it can be fun, it can be great, and food can be amazing. And like, there is obviously a subset of the industry that are like, no carbs, do bodybuilding stuff, but there's also a side of the industry that's very like, we've done everything so stupid that we could write the textbook on literally what not to do and probably wouldn't have enough space, that now we're just thinking this doesn't have to be a misery. Don't make the mistakes we made, ultimately.
Absolutely. Yeah. Learn from our failures so that you don't have to make them again. Absolutely. Yeah. And just to wrap up, a final question, kind of topical. You mentioned recession. I'm just thinking, let's say someone's struggling with their health, they want to improve it, but we're in a recession, right? So money's a little bit tighter. How do you kind of provide value to someone to be like, health it's worth investing in, to budget for a coach, for example, to make that commitment to your health? It's worth it, even though, times are tight.
The truth is, I don't convince anyone, and I would never convince anyone. I do believe, and because you are a business person, and I think the reason a lot of good trainers go to business is because they've no business heads, and they're too people-centric, people-oriented. I also think that can go the other pendulum, where there's just a lot of narcissistic toxicity of give me all your money. But I don't. There's an idea of never sell the unsellable. And I think if it's a case where somebody's genuinely in a position where the money is tight right now, it might be best for them to just try and either go it alone, or it might be like maybe they've other stresses on the internet, YouTube. There are channels on YouTube that give out genuinely very good free information that I've seen. I don't think in my podcasts, I don't think I've said anything in my coaching that I haven't said on a podcast as a blanket statement. I think it's just the context of when I say it to clients really matters, and that's the magic. And ironically, giving out my best work for free has made me busy, thankfully, on that. So yeah, the truth is, I would never try and sell someone that isn't 100% committed to me. But that's actually nothing to do with a recession or anything like that. Is I just want the person who's come to me to want to work with me. And if someone has decided that it's not of whether they can't genuinely afford it right now, which is perfectly valid, or whether it's not a high enough priority in the hierarchy because they'd rather use that money for different things, I think that's completely personal. So I think personal training, if I'm entirely honest, I do think it is more of a luxury than a necessity. I think you could easily, within 2 to 3 hours, learn some fundamental principles of decent nutrition and movement if you'd never heard of it before, from reputable pages on YouTube or whatever it is. So yeah,
we're not in the business of changing people's minds or convincing people. We're working with people who are already convinced.
It'll drive you crazy. I don't know if you've ever had clients that you maybe didn't click with. It's happened a couple of times, but I just get the feeling that convincing people to come to you is going to end up, you've lost the. It's not that you want to ever play games with clients, not in the slightest. I would never think about it like that. But leverage. You don't want anybody to almost hold leverage over you to be, well, you convinced me this, now you owe me, I paid you, get me the results, that kind of thing. Which every trainer has definitely experienced that. And it's not a nice feeling, because every trainer does want to do right by their clients. Well, for the most part, I like to think most trainers do. So I need someone to have, like, my favorite clients to work with are people who quote back stuff I said on episode 37 of the podcast. Like, been following you, like what you did with this client, saw what you said on this Instagram post. This is my struggle. I believe you can help me. They're the people I click the most with. That's why we talk about recession, we talk about pandemic, but like I've had clients now, a decent subset of clients going into their second and even third year. And I think it's because we really gel. I think it's as people. I think I provoke something in them and they make me enjoy coming to work, and that relationship shows. I've also had people ask to discontinue after 1 month because what I offer isn't what they needed. And that's perfectly fine. I have no problem with that. When they communicate and it's done maturely like adults, it's grand as well. So that's literally the reason I would never try and sell someone. I don't want the latter. I don't want somebody who I have to convince to work with me. If I'm working with someone, I thought about it long and hard. I want you. I budgeted for this. I took a loan out from my sister when I started my business to work with a trainer in the United States. It didn't turn out to be the best return on investment ever, to be fair, but I had decided it was going to be this guy, and he was very expensive. And my sister said she'd give me the money because she felt that she was like, I trust you. I think you'll do okay in PT, and I trust you'll give it back to me in the future. So I'm not saying do it at all costs and don't put yourself into debt. Definitely not. But when you've made the decision to work with someone, you know.
Yeah. You want to work with people who are bought into you, the person. Yeah, very good.
Yeah, 100%.
So, Paul, it's been brilliant speaking with you. Thanks very much for your time. Is there any projects, podcast episodes, anything you want to plug before we wrap up?
So I've just, do you know what? My podcast in general, Paul Dermody Podcast, my website, pauldermody.com. You can find my blogs, all the podcasts are on it, my written blogs on it. I have some kind of client, not testimonials, but actual case studies on, because I'm not, like I said, I'm not trying to sell anyone. I'm really not, but I do kind of document a step-by-step process on how maybe clients have lost 100 pounds or any of that stuff. So yeah, my website, my podcast, and then my Instagram, Paul Dermody PT, which I'm using a little bit less these days, but they'll catch me there. But thanks a million, man. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed reading your articles as well online. You have a wealth of interesting ideas, and also a very, very interesting video on YouTube where you spoke with the man Gary Vee. So that's always an interesting one. Yeah. So thanks very much, Paul, and we'll be speaking again soon.